Serafina had always been the quiet one, the girl who lived at the edges of everything. In the Ashfell pack, she was known simply as the orphan, the one without a wolf of her own, the one no one truly saw. She woke before dawn to fetch water. She scrubbed floors until her hands cracked. She ate whatever was left after everyone else had finished. For 18 years, this was her life, and she had learned to expect nothing more. Yet somewhere deep inside her, a small flame refused to die. On the coldest nights, when the wind howled through the wooden walls of the servants' quarters, she would look up at the stars and imagine a world where someone might look at her and smile. She never told anyone about these dreams. Dreams were dangerous things for a girl like her. They only made the reality harder to bear. Then came the night that changed everything. The pack council gathered in the great hall, their faces grim in the flickering torchlight. Serafina was cold before them, which had never happened before. Her heart pounded as she stepped onto the cold stone floor. The elders looked down at her with strange expressions, part pity, part relief. "Serafina," said the head elder, an old man with a long grey beard, "you have been chosen for a great honor." She did not understand. Honor was not a word that had ever been spoken to her. The elder explained. 300 years ago, the Ashfell pack had made a promise to the ancient kingdom of Nightthorne, a place high in the frozen mountains. Every 100 years, the pack was to send a tribute, a single person, as payment for an old debt. The time had come again, and they had chosen her. Serafina's throat went dry. She looked around the room, searching for a kind face, but found none. She understood then what this really meant. She was the girl no one would miss. She was the one they could give away without pain. "What happens to the tribute?" she whispered. The hall fell silent. No one would meet her eyes. At last, a younger council member spoke quietly. "No tribute has ever returned, but you must go. It is the will of the pack." That night, they bound her wrists with rope and locked her in a small room. Serafina did not cry. She had learned long ago that tears solved nothing. Instead, she sat by the tiny window and watched the moon rise over the mountains she would soon travel toward. Somewhere out there was a fate she could not imagine. She only knew that the people she had served all her life had thrown her away as easily as breaking an old cup. At dawn, a carriage came. 2 silent guards drove her up the winding mountain roads for 3 long days. The air grew colder with every hour. The trees turned to frost, then to bare black branches, then to nothing at all. On the 3rd evening, the carriage stopped at the foot of a massive fortress. Its towers rose into the grey sky like frozen fingers. Snow covered everything, and not a single sound broke the silence. No birds, no wind, nothing. The guards untied her hands, pushed her toward the great iron gates, and left without a word. The carriage disappeared down the mountain, and Serafina stood alone before the sleeping kingdom of Nightthorne. She wrapped her thin cloak tighter around her shoulders and stared at the gates. She could run, she thought, but where would she go? The mountain was endless and cold, and she had no food, no shelter. If she was going to die, at least she would die knowing the truth of this place. With a deep breath, she pushed against the heavy gates. To her surprise, they opened with a low groan, as if they had been waiting for her. Inside, the kingdom was a vision of frozen beauty. Grand buildings lined empty streets. Fountains stood still, their water turned to ice mid-splash. And everywhere, she saw people, hundreds of them, frozen in place like statues. A woman held a basket of bread. A child reached for a falling leaf that would never land. A guard stood at his post, eyes closed, forever asleep on his feet. Serafina's breath caught. This was no ordinary kingdom. This was a place under a curse. She walked through the silent streets, her footsteps the only sound in the whole world. Something drew her forward, past the frozen fountains and the sleeping people, toward the great palace at the center of the city. Her feet seemed to know the way even when her mind did not. The palace doors opened at her touch, just as the gates had. Inside, a vast hall stretched before her, lit by pale light that came from nowhere, and at the far end, upon a throne of white stone, sat a man wrapped in ice. He was young, perhaps only a few years older than herself, with dark hair and a strong, still face. Frost covered his skin, and his chest did not move. He looked like a king, carved from marble, beautiful and terrible, and utterly alone. Serafina crossed the hall slowly. She did not know why, but she felt no fear, only sadness. Whoever this man was, he had been sleeping here for a very long time, forgotten by the world. The moment her foot touched the bottom step of the throne, something happened. A soft cracking sound filled the air. Serafina froze, as thin lines of light spread across the ice that covered the man. The frost began to melt, falling away in glittering pieces. His fingers twitched, his chest rose, once, then again, and then, slowly, his eyes opened. They were the color of storm clouds, grey and deep, and when they found her, she felt as if the whole world had gone still around them. The man stared at her for a long moment, as though he could not believe she was real. When he spoke, his voice was rough from 100 years of silence. "You came," he whispered. Serafina took a step back. "Who are you?" Slowly, painfully, the man rose from his throne. He was tall, and though he swayed on his feet, there was a strength in him that could not be hidden. "My name is Kale," he said. "I am the king of Nightthorne, or I was, before the curse took everything." As he spoke, a strange thing happened throughout the kingdom. One by one, the frozen people began to stir. The woman with the basket blinked. The child caught the falling leaf. The guard opened his eyes and gasped. Life returned to Nightthorne, slowly but surely, as though a great weight had been lifted from the entire land. Kale watched it happen with wonder in his eyes. Then he turned back to Serafina. "For 100 years I have waited," he said. "The curse could only break when the right person crossed my threshold, and that person is you." Serafina shook her head. "There must be a mistake. I am nobody. I am only a tribute my pack sent to pay an old debt. They gave me away because no one wanted me." Something flashed in Kale's grey eyes, something fierce and gentle at once. "Then your pack was blind," he said quietly, "for you have just woken an entire kingdom from death." Over the next days, Serafina learned the story of Nightthorne. Long ago, Kale had been a fair and beloved king, but a powerful sorcerer had come to his lands, demanding that Kale hand over his people to serve him. Kale had refused. He would not sacrifice a single life to save himself. In his anger, the sorcerer had cast a terrible curse, freezing the entire kingdom in endless sleep. The only way to break it, the sorcerer had sneered, was for Kale's true match to find him, a person of a pure and unselfish heart who would come to Nightthorne of her own will. "But I did not come of my own will," Serafina said, confused. "I was sent as a tribute." Kale smiled sadly. "You could have run. On the mountain, alone, with the gates before you, you could have turned away. But you walked in. You chose to face the truth, even when you thought it would cost you your life. That is a choice, Serafina. That is the choice that mattered." She did not know what to say. All her life she had been told she was worth nothing. Now this king spoke to her as though she were the most important person in the world. As the days passed, Serafina found something she had never known before. The people of Nightthorne welcomed her with open arms. They gave her warm clothes and good food and a room with a soft bed. They thanked her, again and again, for setting them free. For the first time in her life, Serafina felt like she belonged somewhere. And she found herself drawn to Kale. He was kind and wise, and he carried a deep sadness that she understood, for she carried one of her own. In the evenings, they would walk through the reborn city, and he would tell her stories of Nightthorne as it once had been. She would tell him, shyly at first, of her own small life, of her dreams beneath the stars. He listened to every word as if it were precious. But their happiness did not last. One morning, the sky over Nightthorne turned dark. A cold wind swept through the streets, and the people grew afraid. Kale's face turned pale as he looked to the horizon. "The curse is not fully broken," he said grimly. "It has only weakened. The sorcerer's magic still lingers. And it will not let us go so easily." That night, a shadow appeared in the great hall. It was the sorcerer, or rather, the last of his power, kept alive by his old spell. His voice echoed cold and cruel. "You have woken," the shadow hissed at Kale, "but the curse demands its price. To free your kingdom forever, your true match must give her life force to anchor yours. 1 life for 1,000, that is the bargain. Refuse, and Nightthorne shall freeze once more, this time forever. Seraphina's heart went cold. She looked at Cale, and she saw the horror on his face. No, Cale said, his voice shaking with anger. I will not take her life. I would rather sleep 1,000 years than lose her. The shadow laughed. Then your people are doomed. Seraphina looked around at the faces of the people she had come to love. She thought of the child with the leaf, the woman with the bread, the guard at his post. She thought of Cale, who had refused to sacrifice a single life even to save himself. And she understood, in that moment, that she was no longer the invisible girl from Ashfell. She was someone who mattered. She had a choice to make. She stepped forward. I will do it, she said. I will give my life to save them all. No, Cale grabbed her hand. Seraphina, please, there must be another way. She turned to him, and to her own surprise, she smiled. For my whole life, I was told I was worth nothing, but you showed me that I am worth something, so let me choose. Let me choose to save the people I love. That is my life to give. But as she spoke those words, something extraordinary happened. A warm light began to glow in her chest. It spread through her whole body, bright and golden. The rope marks on her wrists, the years of coldness and loneliness, all of it seemed to burn away in that light. Seraphina gasped as a power she had never known rose up inside her. Deep within her, a wolf awoke. All her life she had been called a girl without a wolf, an omega with no strength. But the truth was that her wolf had been sleeping, waiting for the one thing that could wake it, a true bond, a true home, a reason to rise. And now, standing beside Cale, choosing love over fear, her wolf finally answered the call. Silver light burst from her, filling the hall. The shadow of the sorcerer shrieked and pulled back. This cannot be, it cried. The curse demands a life given freely. And a life was given freely, Cale said, his own eyes beginning to shine. But love freely given is stronger than any death you can demand. For the sorcerer had made one mistake. He had believed that sacrifice meant death. But the truest sacrifice was the willingness to give everything for another, without holding anything back. Seraphina had offered her life not out of despair, but out of love. And that pure, selfless love was the very thing the curse could not survive. The silver light and the golden light joined together, growing brighter and brighter, until the whole hall blazed like the sun. The shadow of the sorcerer screamed one last time and then shattered into 1,000 pieces, fading into nothing. The dark clouds over Nightthorne broke apart. Warm sunlight poured down over the city for the first time in 100 years. The curse was broken, not by death, but by a love that refused to give in. When the light faded, Seraphina stood in the center of the hall, changed. She was no longer the frightened, invisible girl. She stood tall and strong, her eyes bright, her heart full. Cale took her hands in his, and this time he was smiling. You did it, he said softly. You freed us all. We did it, she answered, together. In the days that followed, Nightthorne came fully back to life. Flowers bloomed where snow had once lain. Music filled the streets. The people celebrated, and at the center of it all stood their king and the girl who had saved them. Word traveled down the mountain and eventually reached the Ashfell pack. The elders who had sold Seraphina as a tribute came to Nightthorne, expecting to find gold or riches. Instead, they found her, standing beside the Alpha King, dressed not in rags, but in robes fit for a queen. They fell silent when they saw her, ashamed and afraid. Seraphina looked at the people who had thrown her away. Once, their scorn had crushed her. Now, it could not touch her at all. You sent me here to be forgotten, she said calmly, but I was not forgotten. I was found. I found a home, and a family, and my own strength. You saw nothing in me, but I was never nothing. The elders had no words. They bowed their heads and left, and Seraphina felt only peace as she watched them go. Cale came to stand beside her. Will you stay? He asked, not as a tribute, not as a servant, but as my equal, as the Luna Queen of Nightthorne. Seraphina looked out over the kingdom she had saved, over the people who loved her, and up at the sky she had once only dreamed beneath. Then she looked at Kale, the king who had seen her worth when no one else could. "Yes," she said, and this time her smile reached all the way to her eyes. "I will stay." And so the girl who was sold as a tribute became the queen of a kingdom reborn. She had learned the greatest truth of all, that her worth was never something others could give or take away. It had always been hers to claim, and in the end, she had claimed not only her own strength, but a home, a love, and a future brighter than any star she had ever wished upon.